Hi, this is Megan, back again with the crochet melody. I have made these super cute pants for Valentine's Day. If you want to feel yourself and feel as good as I feel in my pants, let's jump right into this tutorial because it's about to be popping. Well, it's already popping. I'm about to show you how to make these pants. I used 9 skeins of Lion Brand's Off the Hook Magic. You will need more than 9 skeins if you're larger than a size small or medium. But otherwise, let's get right into it. In total, I have 3 hearts that I made. I'll be showing the one that I made that is on the back of my pants. As you can see, you can't see the full heart because I rolled the pants down because the heart ends up being 14.5 inches tall, which makes it really too tall for my size. If you have a really big butt or you want your pants to be super high-waisted, then I recommend you make the 3 hearts, which is the one on the back and the one on the right leg and the one on the left leg. Otherwise, I just stick to making 2, one for the right and one for the left leg. You start the heart by finding that burgundy loop and leaving out 5 hot pink loops beyond that. Those won't be used throughout the entirety of making the heart. After you set aside those 6 loops, you now have 21 loops that you want to count out and just lay them straight out from left to right. My stitch markers were misplaced, so I just found a scrap piece of yarn and placed it around that 6th loop that I left out, so I will remember when I come back around not to go into that loop. I now have my 21 loops laid out from left to right, and now all I'll be doing is taking my working yarn, which is the yarn I have not yet used, and just bring it over top of those loops, and I'll lay out the yarn from right to left. Now all I'm doing is taking all the yarn from the 2nd row and pulling them one at a time through each loop from back to front. So technically it's going to be stitch number 22 if you want to sit there and count, but it's your 2nd row of 21. So take that loop right next to number 21 and bring it from the back to the front of that loop and pull upward, and now the loop from row 2 will now be at the top. You do the very same thing for the next loop that is available. You bring it from back to front through that next loop on row 1, and now that loop will be on top, the one you just pulled through your loop on row 1, and just repeat that all the way down 21 times. If you are choosing to make that 3rd heart at the back, make sure you leave your middle stitch, which is stitch number 11, just completely undone. And what you do with that 2nd row is when you get to loop 11 of that row, you just don't bring it through. You skip over it on rows 1 and row 2, and you begin with your stitch 12 as normal, bringing it from back to front. The 2 loops I'm holding here are loops 11 from rows 1 and 2. I only leave these 2 undone on the heart I'm making on the back of the pants because those 2 loops will then be used to help make the crotch of the pants. The other 2 hearts at the bottom of the leg are made normally, and for those you pull loop 11 on row 2 through row 1's loop 11 and continue on. I just completed row 2 by pulling those loops through 21 times, making sure not to go into any of the loops on that yellow stitch marker or on the left of that stitch marker. And I just pull my work from left to right. I'm just doing the same thing all the way down, pulling those loops on row 3 through the loops of row 2. The light pink loop there is your loop number 11 of row 3 and is the start of the bottom of the heart. And just make sure you leave that light pink loop undone as well. If you're making the heart, that'll be on the back of the pants. After each row, it'll be best practice to just pick your work up for a second and check behind it to make sure you did not leave any loops behind. Because we're making an image of the heart, you don't want to miss a single loop or else you won't be able to make the heart. I'm just going to leave you to the rest of these. Make sure after you complete each row as well that you make sure those light pinks are lined up correctly. And you can tell just by checking if you have the same amount of hot pink loops to the right and left or whatever light pink you do have on that row. Once you check for that, you can move on to the next row. We are now going to be using loop 11 on this row and every row moving forward. So make sure with that 2nd of those 3 light pinks that you do pull it through the light pink loop on your 3rd row, and continue that on every round using loop 11. Now this is what your heart should look like. I'm leaving those loops at the top undone for now. I'll be securing them all at the very end when I finish the pants. And now all 3 of my hearts are done. The other 2 are for the bottom of the pants on the right and left side, so they are made normally. For now, I'll be putting away that heart I used for the top of the pants just to focus on the bottom 2 hearts to make my legs. Just make sure you're setting aside the right heart before you begin to move on. The heart measures about 14.5 inches across and 14.5 inches up. At this point, you will want to take your hip measurements because these are straight leg pants. You will want to know your hip measurements now to know how wide to make the rest of your leg. The widest portion of my hips is 38 inches around. These loops do not have much stretch to them at all in the horizontal direction, so you will want to add at least 2 inches to whatever number you do get for your hips. So I'm using a measurement of 40 for my hips, even though they are truly a 38. You divide that number by 2. 40 divided by 2 is 20, so each leg will be 20 plus 3. The 3 inches extra make up the middle of the crotch. So long story short is you take your hip measurement, add 2 inches to that measurement, divide that number by 2. Then once you divide the number by 2, you add 3 to that number so that you will have the circumference of each leg. Because my heart is 14.5 inches, well, everyone's is, and I want to get to 23 inches, I take 23 and subtract the 14.5 from that, and now I have 8.5 inches left. Now I'm just measuring across the heart from any stitch just to see how many stitches I would need to make up those 8.5 inches that I have remaining to go around my leg. 8.5 inches goes to about 12 loops for me. So I'll be adding 12 loops to the 21 that the panel of the heart already has, and I'll have 33 total loops around my leg. For example, if your leg is over 29 inches around, what you would do is take 14.5 2 times, which is 29 inches. And let's say, just for example, your leg is 38 inches around, right? You'd have your 29 inches, and you need to have 9 more to get to 38 inches. So you'd measure any random stitches across the heart and see how many loops, rather not stitches, it would take to get to those extra 9 inches. And all the loops that you have after that original 14.5 inches is what you'll need to use for our next panel that we're making. So y'all, I do love math, so that's why I'm trying to break down this math as much as I can. But if it's still not making sense to you, please leave a comment and I will break it down even more than this if necessary. And right now I'm just going to show you how I'm making that next panel I use based on all those numbers I just mentioned. But this time though, when I start with my next scheme to make the panel, I just only leave out 2 loops rather than leaving out the 6 that I originally did, because now we're not following the heart, so there's no need to leave out all 6 of those. So I leave out 1 burgundy and 1 pink, and I count down 12 loops because I need 12 loops in order to get from 14.5 of the heart to my 23 inches total around my leg. And you leave out however many loops you need to do that same thing. And after that, I'm doing what I was just doing on the heart by pulling my work from right to left and then pulling each loop from back to front 12 times. And I do that on each row around until I have the same amount of rows that the heart has. And the heart has 17 completed rows, and that 18th row are those loops that are lying at the very top of my heart, as you can see, that aren't finished. I'm counting that row as the 18th row. So this panel is made again with the same exact technique. So once I finish pulling my 12 loops from back to front, I will take my working yarn and flip it to the other side of my work on the right hand side, and then pull through those next 12 and so forth and so on. I'll meet back up with you at the end of this to show you how this panel will look. And you will do this panel twice because you're making 2 legs, and one panel will go and attach to one heart for one leg, and the other panel will attach to your other leg for your second heart. So I just finished panel number 1, and this is how it looks. Later on, I'll be attaching the back of the calf to the front heart on both sides, but for now I'll be leaving those sides undone. And I'm just showing you really quick how I get to those 23 inches. That's 14.5. And then this panel over here measures 8.5. And altogether, those equal 23 inches. And that's 33 loops around. So I wanted my pants done in a particular way where those light pink loops that do come up are done in the opposite way on each leg. So what I did was I left out 2 loops on the next panel that I'm making, just like I did on my first one, but I start the panel from right to left rather than from left to right. And all it does is just leave those light pink loops to show up in the opposite way. And I thought that was cute. But if you don't care about that, literally don't worry about this at all. Just make your 12 loops or however many you need and continue on as normal. And don't mind me. So you do the same thing and do those up for 18 rows. And as you can see, those light pink loops are opposite of each other on those 2 panels. And I think that's just so cute. And now we'll be continuing on. To determine how many more rows you need to add to these 2 panels upward, all you need to do is measure your leg from your ankle to the very start of your crotch, because that's where that back heart will be placed at. So the measurement of my leg from ankle to the start of the crotch is 22 inches, and 22 inches minus 14.5, which is the height of the heart, leaves me with 7.5 inches, and that's how many rows I'll be measuring up from here. And again, you measure the heart, but now in the vertical direction, so you can see how many rows you're going to need to get to, for me, 7.5 extra inches, or however many inches you need, depending on the length of your leg. And if you don't want to measure this, it's really not a big deal. If it's for you, you can just try it on as you do rows and see at what point your legs are covered, and then you want to add the heart on the back. I placed this panel with the yarn ending on the right hand side of the panel to the left of the heart, so that I'll begin using those loops of the working yarn on the top of the heart first, and then going in the round. I start by taking the very next loop that's available on my working yarn and pulling it through back to front on the first loop available at the top of my heart, and I just do that all the way down 21 times on the heart. After pulling through that 21st loop on the heart, I'll just be flipping that back panel that I made underneath and connecting to the very next loop that's there, so that my yarn will be in the round. So I flipped it underneath. Now the 2 backs of the work are facing each other, and I pick up that very first light pink loop that's available on that back panel to finish off the round with my last 12 loops. And it's the same concept. You take the very next loop on the back panel and the very next loop of your working yarn, and bring that working yarn from the back to the front, and do that 12 times, and you'll have 33 loops pulled through now at the end of this round. Remember, the number of loops you have per row will be different based on the amount of loops you have for your back panel. And after I complete these 33 loops, that'll be the end of my first row. And to start your next row is very easy. All you do after you finish loop 33, or whatever number you ended on, you just take that very next loop that began your round 1 and pull the next loop of your working yarn from back to front through that next loop. And that is the start of round 2. And I did not use stitch markers. You can place a stitch marker here if that helps you see where you begin at, and also to keep track of how many rows you made, so you can repeat that same process on your next leg. When I run out of yarn, I leave out at least 2 loops every time, just to make sure I have a nice length to tie my work at the very end. But I always leave out 3 when I do these color changes. It's just easy for me to remember to leave out 3 hot pink loops when I'm ending my last yarn, and when I start the next skein, I leave out 1 burgundy and 3 hot pinks on that one. And that just helps me to keep track, so that when I get to my next leg, I can remember to do that, and my colors lay out the same every time I do my color change. After I leave out that burgundy loop and those 3 hot pink loops that follow, I take that next loop and pull it through the next available loop on my pants, and just continue on. And at this moment, you can tie the back of your work. I personally just leave mine to the end, because I want my color changes to look a certain way. It helps me to see exactly where I changed my yarn, and I wouldn't be able to see that as easily if I tied them right now. I do 11 rows of 33 loops, so altogether right now I have 29 rows, with the 18 rows from the heart originally, and then the 11 rows I just added on. And I'm just showing you that I still have those splits there on both sides of the heart and the calf. I'm not closing those until the end. And if you have a lot of yarn remaining, I would not cut it yet. I would just leave it there, because I use the rest of that yarn to begin working up my leg once I connect that back panel. It just saves you from having extra ends to cut. So now when I work my next leg, the yarn on that back panel ends on the left hand side. So I just begin my work in the opposite direction, and I pull those 21 loops now from right to left. And then once I finish those first 21 loops, I do the same thing that I did last time, but just in the opposite direction. So now that I'm going right to left, I continue right to left and pull through those next 12 loops. And I do that for a total of 11 times as well, until I have 11 rows of 33 loops for me, and for you is however many loops you have all around, and how many rows you need to get the proper length for your leg. And I'll be showing you how those colors are facing opposite the entire time. And if that's important to you, make sure that you check periodically with your other leg to make sure that the loops are falling in the same way, but just in opposite direction. And you can see here why I left that gap open when I did change from one skein to the next, because it helps me to see that I'm on track when I'm doing my second leg. And I'm still leaving 3 hot pink loops out on my original skein, and when I put in my new skein, I leave out 1 burgundy and 3 hot pink loops. And also you can see here that my colors are facing opposite each other on these legs, or hopefully you can see it. Actually, you can see it better here, that all the colors are facing opposite each other, and that's what I wanted. And now I have my 11 extra rows completed on both legs with 29 rows total. And now I'm ready to add that heart at the back of my pants to here. If you decide that you do not want to do the heart at the top, it would be a lot easier, to be honest, if you don't. You just want to follow the steps I'm doing to create my crotch completely. And after that, you can just go in the round. To determine where your crotch should be for your pants, you want to start counting from that very middle stitch of the heart. And I'm counting from that hot pink loop that rests right above the very middle of the heart. And I just follow that line straight up so I can see where that meets at the very top of the pant. And I just place a stitch marker on that very top loop. And no, I do not have my real stitch markers again, so I'm just placing a strand of yarn that I have lying around the very top loop of line 33. I now have 32 lines or columns remaining. And what I do from here is, depending on which leg I'm looking at, I'll be counting those 16 stitches to the right or the 16 stitches to the left. Just whatever stitches are laying toward the middle portion of your body where the crotch will be. The crotch will be 4 loops wide, which is about 3 inches. This is a standard number that can be used across all sizes. And now I want my crotch to be the 4 loops that lie directly in the center of those 16 loops that are on the middle side of my body. So for me, right, because I have 16 and I want the middle 4 of those 16 loops to be the crotch, I will count over 6 from that line 33, which is the center line of the heart. I'm counting over 6 loops, and then I place a stitch marker on loop number 7 from there, and I place a stitch marker on loop number 10. And I know from doing that those 2 loops and then the 2 loops that lie in between those are the 4 of the crotch. If it helps you to better visualize it, you can put stitch markers on all 4 of those loops, and those 4 will be your crotch. 2 will belong to the back. I'm doing air quotes, you can't see that, but 2 of those loops will belong to the back of the pant, and 2 of those loops will belong to the front of the pant. And I just want to use different numbers outside of mine if you're having trouble understanding what I'm saying about this. So let's say, for example, you have a pant that's 45 loops around per leg, and your middle line will be line 45. So that means you have 44 loops left. 44 loops divided by 2 is 22. And when you count to get the 4 middle loops of 22, you have 9 loops in the front of your crotch and then 9 loops to the back of your crotch. And so the 4 loops for your crotch will be loops 10, 11, 12, and 13. Because you have 9 numbers in front of 10, 11, 12, and 13, and you have 9 loops behind that. And I hope that makes sense. Again, please leave a comment if anything about this is confusing. And if you have an even number of columns around instead of an odd number of 33 like I have, like let's say you have 46, you can't divide, once you take out line 46 and you have 45 lines left, you can't just be sitting there counting 22 and a half rows, which is what you have to get to 45 lines remaining. So in that instance, what I would do is just have 9 stitches in the front, right? And then I have my 4 loops for the crotch, so loops 10, 11, 12, and 13. And then I'll just have 10 that lie beyond those 4 I made for the crotch, because the 10 loops plus the 4 loops for the crotch is 14, and then the 14 plus the 9 in the front is 23, and that'll be half of 46. Now, I really hope I'm not confusing anybody. I just want to give more examples so that you can better understand how I'm getting these numbers for myself and how you can get these numbers for you. So on each leg, I have 1 stitch marker on line 33, which is the middle of the heart. I have 2 stitch markers on my crotch area, 1 on loop number 7 and then 1 on loop number 10. You can also mark loops 8 and 9, or whichever 4 loops account for your crotch, if that helps you. The last stitch marker I place on each leg is exactly 8 loops down from the last loop of your crotch, and that's for every size. And that is to account for when you place your back panel on of your heart, the very last loop of your heart should be matching up with that last stitch marker. And my back panel of my heart only has 20 loops at the bottom because I skipped over stitch 11 in the middle, if you remember, which I'm showing you now. So because I only have 10 on each side, I need 10 corresponding loops on my pants. So what I'm doing is I'm counting loops 9 through 18 on my pants, and those will line up with the 10 loops on the right hand side of the heart, and then on the opposite leg it will line up with the left hand side of the heart when you count those stitches 9 through 18 on your other side of your pants. You pick which 10 loops those are by counting the last 2 loops of your crotch and the 8 loops beyond that on the back side. So what I'm doing now is I'm beginning the front side of my pants, and since my working yarn ends so closely to the very front of my pants, I don't cut here. All I do is skip those next 3 light pink loops on my working yarn, and I begin with that 4th loop that I'm holding right now. And what I do is on my pants, I skip those next 2 stitches. The next 2 stitches will be connected to the back panel where I left those 2 spaces at the very bottom of that heart. So that's why we're skipping those 2. And so we're going to be going into that 3rd loop that's available on the pants with the 4th loop from the working yarn, because we just skipped 3 of those loops from the working yarn. And you just pull straight through from back to front. And I forgot to mention we are working on the right leg right now. And now I'm pulling that next loop that's available from back to front, and you should just pull that 2nd loop through the very front stitch of your crotch, the one that you have your stitch marker on indicating your front side, and that's how you know you're on track. And now you just continue down your leg from right to left. Since my leg is 33 around and I'm connecting my back panel at the end, and my back panel is connecting over 10 loops, I take away 10 from 33 and I'll have 23 loops that I have to go through back and forth. And this is not in the round because the back panel is going to go along those last 10 stitches. So I'll be turning my work every time I finish a row. So I just finished the row 1 of this section. I make sure not to put any loop right there where that stitch marker is, because that stitch marker indicates where I'll be starting my back panel connection. Now I turn my work and lay my working yarn in the opposite direction, and then I pull through those 23 loops that I just made. This is my row 2 of the upper section of the pants where the legs are finished, and I'm now building up the hip and waist section. So I'm just showing you what your work will be looking like if you're following along with me, and I'm going to be attaching that heart panel at the back. You will have a space there of 10, and you see my loops are sticking out. Make sure that yours are as well so that they can be attached to the heart later on. And if you're doing it correctly, that space that I was just showing you will be at the back of the work. And when you flip your pants over, you will see these hearts on the front side, or this one heart on the front side. And that means you're doing it properly, and that space should be completely filled in like mine is right now. And by the space, I mean the space up top where your waist and hip are should be filling in completely on the front side. And I'm just showing you how the heart will attach once we get to that point. And I only stopped because I ran out of yarn. So I'm just going to be adding a new skein of yarn in the same way that I have before. If you're following along with me and we'll be adding the heart, you will go up your side hip and front portion of your pants with the 23 stitches or however many you need for your pants. for 17 rows. If you're not adding the heart in and you just want to go in the round instead of adding that heart at the back, all you have to do is, once you have your crotch together and you have those 4 stitches accounted for on either side, you stitch those together. And you can do that with the yarn that you already have here, or you can do it with a thinner yarn. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that those 4 stitches on either side of the legs are joined together in the middle. And then after that, you'd go in the round around the whole entire leg. And let me see if I can explain this to you, because I can't show it to you because I didn't do it myself with these particular pants. But with my pants, right, I have 33 stitches around on both sides. Once I put those middle 4 together on each of those legs on both sides, I now have 29 stitches around on both sides because I've taken 4 away from both of those legs. So that means as you go around, if you have the same pants I had and you were following the steps I'm explaining now, you would have done 58 stitches around. Then after you get the height that you want for your pants, you just stop, and I'll show you how I secure my loops at the end and how I put my drawstring in. But otherwise, if you're making it hard, keep following along. So I finished my 17 rows on my first leg with the 23 stitches. I'll be showing you that very soon. Right now, I just want to show you how I begin the opposite leg. It's done the same way, but just in the opposite direction as I've been doing. I skipped those first 2 loops that are next to my working yarn because those are going to be used with the back heart. And after I skip those loops, I then skip 3 stitches on the working yarn and take that 4th loop from the working yarn and bring it through the 3rd available loop of the pants. And the 3rd available loop is one of the 2 front loops that'll be on the front side of the pants that'll create the crotch area. And then that's your stitch number 1 of 23 in my case. And you just do however many you did on the opposite leg that you have for yourself. And you complete that row 17 times. And now I'll be showing you how the pants should look. This is the front side of the right and left legs. The top, hip, and waist area should be completely filled in like mine are. And then when you flip them around, you'll see that the back is almost completely empty, and that's where the final heart will go. Now I'm attaching that heart, and to do that, I'll be taking those loops that are still out on the pants for those 10 stitches that we left undone, and I'm dragging them from the front of the work to the back of the work, making sure to put my stitches in between each of the loops. You do that across all 10 of the stitches, and they won't be secure until you flip the work around and pull those loops over one another. So be careful and make sure that you're pulling your heart as close to those pants as possible. So as you're pulling those loops in, they remain there until you flip your work and loop them all together. Just make sure that each loop you pull through is falling directly into the middle of the loop on the previous round above it in the heart. Once those 10 loops are pulled through from front to back, to make sure those loops do not come out, I grab that section of the yarn where the loops went in with both hands, and then I flip the work from the front to the back. You can now see that those 10 loops are still there sticking out. I do count the stitches just to make sure I have 10 of them. If you still have your stitch markers on there, the one I have right there with that green yarn on it is my second one. And I should have 10 in total, which I do. And now I'll be looping the yarn through from the outside hip area of the pant toward the crotch area, which is the section where the green yarn was located. So all I'm doing is taking that second loop and dragging it through the first loop, which is the one with the black yarn still attached. So the first loop you had will be laying down now, and your second loop should be standing up. And you repeat this all the way down the row, but now you're dragging your third loop through the second one. And the second loop will be laying down, and your third one will be standing up. And you do that all the way down until you have all 10 loops accounted for. Now I'm doing the same thing on the opposite leg. I'm dragging in all 10 of those loops from front to back through the bottom of the heart. Grab that section you just completed with both hands and flip the pants from front to back. You will now see those 10 loops, just like you did on the other side, available and ready to pull through one another. But just as before, we're going to be doing this in the opposite direction. So instead of moving your yarn from left to right and pulling through, you'll be pulling through from right to left so that you'll be starting from your outer hip area and heading toward the crotch. When you finish, your 10th loop should be standing up on both sides, one on your right leg and one on your left leg. The 2 hot pink stitches are the ones we left undone on that 11th column of that heart, and now we'll be joining all of these together. This is what the front side looks like, and you can see that gaping hole there. We're just closing that up right now. I'm just taking my scissors and cutting that hot pink yarn toward the base. I'm doing that for both of the hot pink loops. I'm only cutting on one side, so the other side of each of those hot pink loops will still be attached. I start closing those gaps by wrapping each cut loop around that space that I'm showing right now. And I just wrap it underneath and then bring it back forward toward me without tying anything yet. And I do the same thing for the second strand and drag it through those next 2 loops, just drag it underneath them, and then have the end coming back forward towards you. Y'all, this does not have to be super technical because this is the bottom portion of your pants. Nobody's going to be seeing your direct crotch as you're walking, so it doesn't exactly matter if you can see those loops laying over the way that they do. So just continue along and just make sure that the hole is not there. That's the only point. Well, actually, no. The most important point is that your yarn does not come undone. You want these to be secure and make sure that the hole is not showing. Okay, cool. Now we're just going to tie those ends together. I'm only tying them twice for now. And after I tie them twice, I'll be dragging them through those light pink loops and tying again. It is imperative, though, that you do not tug on this yarn all crazy. The yarn will come undone, and once it starts to get fuzzy like that, you have to go back and cut it where it's no longer fuzzy, or else it will continue to unravel on itself once it gets to that state. And I'll show you what I mean. And you do not want to have this happen because then the pants won't be secure. So when you tug, just, tug a bit and make sure it feels snug, but don't yank on the yarn. And just pay attention as you're tugging, because once you put too much tension on it, it will break. And once it breaks, ciao. It's not the end of the world, but it's just a problem you don't have to face. So now I'm just dragging those 2 dark pink loops through the light pink ones, and I'm tying the dark pink ones 4 times. Now it is going to be kind of difficult to get them tied 4 times because you're working with less yarn each time you tie around. At least get to 3 and make sure that on 3 it's feeling pretty snug. I was able to just use my hands to pull through the first 3 times, but on that 4th one, I did create the loop with 1 strand of the hot pink yarn, and then to grab that other hot pink strand, I just found a random hook I had lying around, and I went through the first loop that was there and pulled the second loop through. So if you can do something like that, great. If not, it's okay. It really is, as long as the knots are snug and you can feel if it's very snug or not on your round 3. And this is how my work looks now on the front side. Now all that's left to do is join our sides up. You should now have 7 sides that need to be joined together. The one on the front hand side between your right and left leg. You have 2 on the back side on the right and left side of the heart. That's 3 total. Next you'll have 4 on the legs, 2 on one leg and 2 on the other. Altogether equals 7. And y'all, just lied on accident. We do actually have a couple more things to do besides that. We do have to drag all these loops together at the top of the pants, and that doesn't take too much time. It's the same method we use to connect those loops once we connect the pants and the top of the heart. All you do is pull through that second loop through your first one, and now your second loop is standing up. You pull loop 3 through loop 2, and now loop 3 is standing up, and you continue that all the way around, just as we did before. And when I'm getting to the next panel, I continue with the same process. I just take the next loop that's available on that next panel and drag it through the last loop that I have and continue on that way. And just for those who are following the other way, I suggested you could do these pants by just going in the round over and over. Once you get to the point where your pants are the proper height, you just do the same method and it'll be even easier because it'll just be straight around because you didn't add a heart or anything. There's no panels. All of it's now connected as one item, and you would just loop around. For me, that would have been over 58 stitches. For you, it's either that or however many stitches you had. And shameless plug, y'all follow me on Instagram at the Crochet Melody. It's the same as my YouTube handle. Sometimes I post content of me singing while I crochet, and here's a little bit of that. Why can't I? Alright y'all, so back to the video. All we're doing right now is cutting through our working yarn. And the way I cut is, I take my loop and I make sure that it's straight and it's not turned one way or the other. And what I do is I cut directly in the middle of it so that the line will extend straight out. And I get a line that's 35 inches long. I do that 7 times over so that I can use those straight lines to join all of my panels together. Right now I'm joining the bottom of the leg, and this is how I'm doing all my joins. I'm just taking a strand of 35 inches. I bring the yarn through that very top loop that's available on my left side from the front to the back, and then I drag the yarn on the right side from back to front on that first loop that's available to me. I bring it from front to back again through the original hole that I went through, and I just lay my yarn over the loop that's now there and then pull underneath it downward so that I can make my knot. I push upward on the knot until it's secure so that the knot will lay at the base of my work. Remember not to tug too tight so that your yarn will not break. And now for the rest of the leg, I'll just be dragging the yarn from the back to the front this time through that next loop that's available on my left hand side, and then from front to back on my right hand side. And I do that about 3 times or so before I tug down just to secure those 3 loops on either side that I went through. I just continue that on down. I go upward on the left side from back to front, and I drag that yarn down from the front to the back of the work. After I do that about 3 or 4 times, there's no particular number you have to do. I just tug down to make sure my yarn is secure as I'm going down. When I get to the end of the row, I go through those last 2 stitches twice. That just helps to secure the end. Now I flip the pants to the back side, and what I do here is I take the rest of that line I just finished with, and I find a random loop just that's lying toward the center of that joint I just did, and I pull my yarn through it. I yarn over and then pull my yarn again through that same loop, and now there's a loop available with the yarn I just pulled through a second time. And I wrap my yarn around from the back to the front, and I pull it through, making sure to keep that knot toward the base of the pants as I'm pulling, so that I won't have to have that knot be too far away. I want the knot to lay right on the pants. And y'all, this is what I was warning against right here. I sat there and tugged that too hard, and oh honey, you do not want that to happen, because it's just going to keep unraveling. Don't leave it like that if it does happen to you. Just undo your work very gently until you see the point where that string will no longer come undone, and cut right there. And then you have to redo what you just did. And I'll be showing you just real quick how you can tie a knot to secure more yarn if this were to happen to you, and continue on. So y'all, I had to go all the way back until about halfway up that join, because now I had too little yarn left after I tugged too hard. Now I take 2 lines, lay one to the left and one to the right, and what I'll be doing is I'm making 2 knots. I make 1 knot on the right hand side by just yarning over and bringing the yarn back toward me, and then pulling the yarn through that loop that I just made. And I do the same exact thing with the opposite yarn. Make sure to leave enough space at the end so that the second yarn has enough room to make a knot. So after pulling the yarn back a bit, I just do the same thing. I bring the yarn underneath and toward me, and then bring it toward the back again. And now with that loop there, I just bring the yarn forward from back to front, and now I have 2 knots there. I pull down on both ends to make sure both knots are very secure, and then once both knots feel secure and snug, I tug on the base of those 2 loops and pull away from each other so that the knots end up sliding toward one another. And once those knots are touching, they're secure and they're good to go. So that's how you reattach your yarn if you need to do so, and then you continue on with your work as normal. Now after joining all of your panels, this is what your work should look like. And yes, the pants do look ginormous on me at the top, and that's okay. I'm going to be adding my drawstring at the end, and it's going to pull all the sides of it together, and everything will be just fine. And I'm just measuring to show you about how much extra space I do have up there. I have about 21 inches because half of it measures at 10.5 right now. So yeah, y'all, whatever, let's get to it. Now to make my drawstring, all I'm doing is the same thing that I've been doing to secure my loops at the end of the pants, except I'm not securing anything, I'm just pulling the loops through. I take loop 2 and drag it through loop 1, and I have my loop 2 standing up. I bring loop 3 through loop 2, now loop 3 is standing up, bring loop 4 through loop 3, so forth and so on. And I do that for about 60 of these, I want to say. Originally, I started with 70, and my 70 was way too long, so I took those out. So it was about 60, but you can just do however many you need and put it to your waist and see how it's fitting. And I leave my strand always, whenever I'm making any drawstring, I leave the working yarn attached to my drawstring, just in case I do have to add more to my drawstring or take some off. I don't have to worry about reattaching any more yarn. So for my finished pants, my drawstring is facing inward. I didn't show that on video. I have it right now pulling in from the front to the back as if the drawstring will face outward. But then once I finished the drawstring, I decided I wanted it to face inward. So just do what I'm doing, but the opposite of it. So instead of bringing your drawstring from front to back, bring it from back to front if you want the two ends of your drawstring to face the inside. And after I bring my drawstring in or out, it really doesn't matter which direction you go. I skip 2 stitches, and then I bring that drawstring in the opposite direction from front to back here. I skip 2 stitches again and bring the drawstring from back to front. At this point, I just skip over 1 and bring the drawstring back in. And this again is no special science either. You can skip how many stitches you want. On the front side and the back side where the heart is, I just skip as little as I can so that on the sides I can skip the most. So I just skipped 5 stitches to bring that yarn from the back to the front. After that, I'll skip 1 and bring the yarn from the front to the back. I'll skip 5 again once I get that drawstring from front to back. And after skipping 5, I bring that drawstring from back to front. I just do that a few times on the side so that most of the scrunching up of the pants will be on the sides. I don't want that scrunching up to happen at all on the back side, since that is where the heart is. If you want your heart to show, then you don't want the top of it to be scrunched up. It technically doesn't matter even for my pants because I did roll them down, and I plan to wear them rolled down for the most part because I feel the heart is too high up on my body. So just do what you want, really. You don't have to be too particular about this, but if you do want that heart to show, I'll show you what I'll be doing so that it won't scrunch up much on the back. So on the side, I have been skipping 5 stitches, and then once my drawstring gets to the front, I skip 1, and this is what I'm looking like once I get toward the back, and you can see the sides all scrunched up. For the back of the heart, I just skip 1 every time. So I skip 1, bring my drawstring in, skip 1 stitch, and bring the drawstring out. And I repeat that all the way until I get to the other side of my heart. Once I get there, I go back to skipping 5 and pulling that drawstring out, and then skipping 1 and pulling the drawstring back in. I do that a few times until I get toward the front. So now at the front, I just go to what I was originally doing, which is skipping 2 stitches and pulling the drawstring inward, skipping 2 stitches again and pulling the drawstring outward, and so forth and so on until my drawstring is facing the inside, because I want both my drawstrings to be facing toward me when I tie them. Now that my drawstring is in and I have a few inches hanging on each side on the inside of my pant, I cut through the middle of the next 2 loops following the end of my drawstring, and I cut the rest of the working yarn off, and I just pull on that last loop from the drawstring, the last formed loop, and I drag the entire thing through. And then I tug on that end just a bit, just to make sure that it's secure. And after that, I tie around once more and make another loop. And I'm just about done after I make that second knot, because this is going to be facing toward me, so I'm just not as concerned about how the end of the knot looks. I'm just dragging it through to make sure everything is secure. And for the last order of business, I am just securing all those ends that I left behind. I cut through the loops as I did before, and then I turn the work toward the inside and I drag those loops down through any random loop on the back side, once for each one. And then if I have two ends next to each other like I do here, I just tie them 4 times, and then I cut the rest of those loops off. And if you don't have quote unquote real stitch markers and you have these little pieces of yarn strands laying around, just untie those as well. And y'all, this is how they look. Look how cute. And the drawstrings are facing the inside. I just have them pulled outward right now. And whenever I do tie my pants, I tie them like a shoelace. And I just leave the drawstrings on the inside as I'm wearing them. And y'all was so excited to go downstairs and record myself dancing in my pants. I forgot to show y'all me rolling them down. But I roll them down from the back to the front, so all my rolls are going outward, if that makes any sense. And y'all, girl, just doing whatever in the living room because, period. My pants are done. I'm so excited. Make sure you get yours done by Valentine's Day. And if not, baby, Valentine's Day is coming every February 14th, and every day is the day to love on yourself. So you can make these anytime. And thank y'all for checking this out. Again, my name is Megan with the Crochet Melody. Follow me. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. My Instagram is the same handle as this. And I'll be back, y'all.